Chapter 2 will cover installing Windows Server. For those of you running Windows in the cloud, this is not a problem at all because you just select what VM you want, and in less than a minute from a template, the operating system is there. If you, for whatever reason, have to install it locally, this chapter will be for you. Just like the desktop, we have a couple of server editions: Data Center, Standard, Essentials, MultiPoint, Storage, and Hyper-V. Data Center can install an unlimited number of VM instances with Hyper-V, of course. It has a couple of features that don't exist in Standard Edition. These 4 that are listed. Standard has most of the features, except the ones mentioned earlier. It only supports up to 2 VMs or Hyper-V containers. So again, it depends on what you're going to be using the server for. That will determine which edition of Windows Server you'll use. Another limitation will be the budget, because server licenses are not cheap. Essentials are for small businesses with 25 or fewer users, and it has some basic services that are used at that level. The MultiPoint Premium server is volume licensing, mostly used in academia. Windows Storage, basically making a server into a NAS. And Hyper-V, the free, where you can run virtual machines. The standard licensing model is based on, instead of processor-based model, each processor core must be licensed for up to 2 physical processors with up to 8 cores each. That is something you have to keep in mind of how the licensing structure works. Because you might be in for a surprise if you get a server that has more cores and, oh, the price tag for this is higher, or, oh, I can't access these cores because the license doesn't let you. That's how they get you. Your minimum requirements for running Windows Server. Again, if we're installing locally, it's going to require some planning. It is not just something you do haphazardly, because servers tend to be an essential portion of the network. You want to ensure you have the right CPU, enough cores to do whatever work is going to be set. Obviously, you should not have any 32-bit processors anymore. Should all be 64. Other things to consider are things like the following: the name of the server, because again, this has to be unique. The protocols that'll be used, the IP address that'll be statically assigned. The server should have a static assignment. Will they be joined to a domain, and what roles this server will have? A clean installation is just the same as installing Windows. The process is pretty similar. The default install is server core, so keep that in mind. When you install Windows Server, you might, if you're not paying attention, you might end up installing core and not the one with the desktop experience, which is the GUI that we're all used to. Notice it doesn't say core. It just says standard. That is the core. If you want one that has a GUI, you use desktop experience. And this portion, again, is the same as you would in any other Windows system where you set up the path. The one difference is you do have to set up a administrator password. And then it'll go through that process. There's where you enter the admin password. Just in case you installed the wrong edition, you could just use this command to change it. Because the core of the operating system is the same, no matter what edition, it's just the roles and features that you can use. It is possible to switch. As long as you have the right product key, you'll be able to make that switch. Becoming more rare if a disk isn't found, because the drivers are normally now native to the OS, but just in case, you'll need to have the right controller driver, just in case it doesn't show up. And then, of course, after you install, you'll need to activate Windows, set the time zone, set IP addresses, all that kind of stuff. And of course, updates. Cannot forget to install updates to a system that will be critical to your network. Updates could install on their own, or you could set a schedule for them, but Windows forces you to install updates no matter what. Once all that is done, then we can go ahead and start setting up our server, whether installing the roles and features that are necessary, or if we're going to turn this into a Hyper-V system, install that role. If we're adding a new server, if there's already a DC, a domain controller existing, then we'll add this server into it, or make it become a domain controller, or just set as a standalone server. Adding servers into our network is important if we're growing our company. If there's already an excessive load on existing servers, then we'll need more servers to handle that traffic and load balance together. If we need to isolate applications, fault tolerance, or we're adding a branch. These are all reasons why we would need to add another server into our network. If we're upgrading, you can either do an in-place or server role migration. The in-place, again, it needs to be at least server 2012. Migrating from earlier versions, you could do it as far back as server 2008. Again, server core has very few roles. It will most likely depend on another server to be the domain controller. If you want to use any of these, you're going to need to use the desktop experience and not server core. Because server core doesn't have these functionalities. Same with all of these. Server core installation is the same as the usual Windows install. The only difference really is choosing the edition that doesn't say desktop experience. And then just as always, you'll install, configure the time, the IP address, the firewall, all that kind of stuff. Server core should not be your first server on the network. It's more of a secondary type. If you cannot live without a Windows GUI, then you really should use desktop experience. But more and more, Windows is becoming less GUI-like and becoming more like its Linux counterparts. So I would suggest to be well-versed in PowerShell like you have been doing the under-the-wire stuff. I would highly suggest being well-versed in PowerShell, especially if you know you're going to be managing Windows servers. Again, like I said, all the Windows editions are pretty much the same. They have all their features and roles installed in this folder. So it is possible to do features on demand because that's where they live. These files should not be removed. If it's taking out a lot of space, there is a way to remove the features. And then later it is possible to download features. Here's a list of them as shown in PowerShell. And then selecting some that are installed. You could use this first command to remove all available features to regain space. Because like I said, this folder does have those roles and features, but it can get pretty big. Because there are a lot of things that server can do. Your feature file store, a network share containing those files required to install the roles, role services. So if you have a primary domain controller, it could, and it has plenty of storage, it could be the one to hold it all. All the other subsequent servers, well, they could just use this command down here in order to install. That way, all your secondary servers don't have to have all the files. They can just pull it from one location.